What up? Yeah, I haven't done one of these in a while, right? It's been a hot minute. I hope everyone's doing okay. I've been doing pretty good as of late. I got the new Donkey Kong game, so I've been playing that. I got it yesterday, so I've been enjoying that. It seems like it's gonna be a short game though, but that's okay. I'm just glad that I finally got to play it. It's been on my backlog for the longest, so finally playing that. I hope everyone's enjoying the holidays, enjoying this break. At least for me, I have a 2 week break off from work, so that's pretty good. The industry that I'm in, they do like a 2 week break off for its employees. So technically I'm actually still working over the break because I'm catching up on work. So my job title is a business analyst, so I got to make like tickets and stuff. So I'm just catching up on that and some of the documentation that I need to do, but I can't really complain. It's been a pretty good. It's been a pretty good last couple of days. So, um, yeah, and yeah, I just hope everyone's having a good time. And I figured I'd make this because I think it's a good time to make it now. And a couple things maybe wanted me spurred me to make this video. It's the I really haven't been I've been reviewing One Piece chapters on the channel for a while, but I don't do them consecutively. I just like kind of hop around a little bit, you know. I'll go maybe like some weeks without reviewing, and then I'll come back on this chapter, and I like that pace. You know, I'm not gonna review every single chapter of of any series. So yeah, I kind of like that, but I didn't review the latest one, which was 1070, and a certain thing in there kind of spurred me to make this, and also some conversations with people like some of my online friends and people on Twitter. A combination of those three things made me spurred me to make this video. So basically, I'm just gonna try and express how I feel about Nika, and Gear 5 and the Devil Fruit and all this stuff ever since March, when chapter 1044, I believe it was, when Gear 5 was revealed. So how I feel about it now that we've sat with it for months. And yeah, and basically the thing in chapter 1070 that spurred me to make this is when I saw Luffy dream up or think up or somehow procure goggles from his hair and put it on his, wear them, and then it looks like he incapacitated Lucci, at least, right? As expected, because Luffy's an emperor and Lucci is not an emperor. He is a CP0 agent, and who knows if he's even the leader of CP0 or the strongest CP0 agent at this point, you know. Um, anyway, but I quickly came to realize that I still have some reservations and things I don't like about. Honestly, I'm just gonna flat out say it about like the Gear 5 Awakening. I mean, the chapter in itself, when I live reacted, I really enjoyed it. But if you remember, I put out like an afterthoughts video right after it, like about how I feel, and it was kind of like I had sat with it for like a day or two, and now I'm kind of revisiting that same video idea, here what, like 9 months later or something like that. So, but basically the big problem for me is what I said back in that video. It's going from rubber to a rubber sun god. It's kind of like if I had Conan, for example, from Naruto, right? Whose ability was paper, right? She had paper jutsu, and then all of a sudden she becomes a paper ice god. It just kind of seems like ridiculous a little bit. You know what I mean? It's just like, what? And I kind of feel that's still what's happening here, where the idea that rubber is somehow connected with the sun, or sun slash fire, and I say the sun because Nika is referred to as the sun god, and the fact that Luffy can manipulate fire, which I'll also talk about this in later in the video, and now imagination powers. It just seems like a hodgepodge of different abilities, and I don't know if that really fits One Piece and really fits Luffy. When I talk about this combination of powers, rubber, fire manipulation in some respect, and imagination, um, I was really resistant to the idea of this like being like one character in One Piece wielding all these things, because it just doesn't seem like especially Luffy wielding all this, because it just doesn't seem like Oda got to that point organically, you know. That's kind of my problem, the big problem that I have with this, which is like, the idea that Luffy had a rubber power, and now he has, and the idea that he could use fire attacks was because for the reader could understand that him stretching and the friction of his limbs against, air and air pressure led to that fire being produced. But now, since he's just called Sun God, and it seems like he can manipulate fire whenever he wants, thanks to his, his fiery hair now, just seems a little, yeah, it just seems a bit too much now. Honestly, that's really what it is. It just seems a bit too much, and same with the imagination powers now. But it just seemed like a very just a combination of powers that didn't really fit: rubber, fire, and imagination. And when I sat and I thought about it a little bit, I made this complaint about this like in the last video too, where um, every single devil fruit that we've gotten in One Piece has been sort of like a distinct power that happens in real life. For example, Buggy has separation powers, right? Mr. Five from Baroque Works has bomb powers. What's her name? The Miss Monday. No, is it Miss Monday or Miss? I think it's Miss Wednesday, right? Miss Wednesday can increase her weight, if you will, right? Um, Crocodile can control sand. Enel can control lightning. Ace can control fire. You have zones that can transform into leopards and into giraffes and into a Pegasus and a dragon. Like all these different sorts of distinct powers. And one thing that I've noticed as of late is that the distinctness and the uniqueness of these powers is slowly starting to be lost in One Piece. And I'll give you, the easiest example to express this with. It's fire, right? Look at fire. At first, we only thought that Ace is a Loja fire user, and Sabo now because he ate the devil fruit. But there's 100, not 100. I'm not gonna say 100, but there's many other characters in One Piece now that can use fire in some respect. King can use fire because he's a Lunarian. Sanji has the Diable Jambe effect. Luffy can do it now. Kinemon can cut fire. So it almost makes you wonder, like, why did you make a devil fruit for fire if everyone else can already like tap into the ability to wield fire? And fire's not the only example. Lightning is another example too. You have Enel who can use lightning, right? Obviously he's the Loja, but then you have the Minx now who can attack with like shock attacks, right? You have Sanji who now has the Ifrit. Or didn't Sanji use like a lightning Diable Jambe at one point or something like that? I know his Ifrit Jambe that he used against Queen is now colored blue, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that had lightning sparks to it too, right? So anyway, but the one thing that I've noticed is like the distinctness of these powers as we've gone along, especially in post time skip, they've started to fade away. And the reason I say especially post time skip is because what I was just saying about Miss Wednesday and her Tun Tun fruit, right? Whatever, her Kilo Kilo fruit. Makvis in the Dofi family has just an upgraded version of that. And it's just kind of like, okay, so now you can make derivatives of these, and you can have like like derivative devil fruits, and you know what I mean. It just kind of seems like a little not contrived, but it just seems like almost like unnecessary. Like, why did you even introduce the power in the first place? Because One Piece is a series that prides itself, and it should pride itself on its uniqueness, on its the combination of all these different genres and unique traits for characters. And the idea that you can just increase your weight by kilos and then increase your weight by tons, like for a reader, that just doesn't really mean much, because you see mountains and destruction and ground, the ground cracking and all these different sort of like background, destructive, effects when fights happen. So the difference between a ton and a kilo doesn't really mean anything to the reader at that point, right? And then obviously you see it also with smiles, right? Like you have Momo, who's a pink dragon, and Kaido, who's the blue dragon right now. So you can have multiple instances of the same power among many different characters. And I feel like Luffy now having being like a sun god and having some sort of manipulation of fire. At least it's implied that's what he can do, like with his Red Hawk and Red Rock. The reason that it burns is because of that, him being like a sun god and having like fire hair, white fire hair, right? All of that stuff seems to imply that, and it just like it's just very, it just kind of takes away from the uniqueness, I think, of some of One Piece's characters and One Piece as a series a little bit too. But I think at the time, one of my biggest problems was just the combination of traits. Like I said, rubber, fire, and imagination. But when I started to think about it a little bit more, I still don't accept it. I mean, it's not whether I have a choice to accept it or not, but I don't fully accept it convincingly. I don't think Oda has really convinced me too much, but I'm slightly more okay with it after I was thinking about like gods in real life, because Nika was being called the sun god, right? That, or at least that's his epithet, the sun god, and it remains to be seen in what happened during the Void Century and whether Nika is an actual god. And I think part of my theory about like the past of One Piece and what happened during the Void Century and even before the Void Century is that gods existed, and that like God as an object, as a thing, as a person, maybe even, is something that exists in One Piece. And I think the One Piece treasure has something to do with that. And I think Will of D, Ancient Weapons, all these stuff, they all come in. They buy into that sort of like God theme, if you will, right? And I think Nika sort of represents that a little bit too. So if Nika at that point was an actual god, I think this is actually okay, because if you look at a character like Zeus, for example, Zeus can shift into other animals and wield lightning. I'm a Hindu. I'm not a very devout Hindu, but Vishnu is not a character. He's a god that can reincarnate into different avatars, like a dwarf or a half lion, half man. And he can wield a conch and a chakram. And Shiva is another one who has like a world serpent, basically, like on his neck, and a waterfall is coming out of his head, and he can drink poison, and he has like a third eye that can burn people. So it's all like these different combinations of powers for all these different gods. Like Odin, for example, has lost an eye and has a spear, and he can shapeshift too. So when I think about like all these different traits of powers in these gods, I think that's what Oda was going for here with rubber, fire, and imagination. But the reason I said like I'm still not wholly accepting of it is because I don't think rubber as a power or as an ability is the most impactful or powerful, not even most powerful, just even the most impactful ability to put on a person. And that's why I'm saying I just don't feel that Luffy now being revealed to have, the Nika Devil Fruit is an organic development. Because when I think about shape-shifting and all these different other abilities that I just mentioned for all these other, gods from all these other myths, those seem like, supreme, all-powerful, like god-like, powerful, strong abilities. Rubber is not really like that. I think it would have been better if Oda, like if this was his game plan in the end, right, was to just have Luffy be some sort of like either initially like a fire character or an imaginative character, and I'll talk about imagination and how that comes to the Nika Devil Fruit in a few, and then then come up with the Nika Devil Fruit reveal. Because then if I saw like Nika stretch, like him stretching and all this, right, I could that would seem like the more it would seem like a better, or it would be more accepting to me, because you started off with like a much more like not important, but like a much more recognizable, powerful ability, and now you're like fleshing all this godlike persona that you made for Luffy with all these other abilities, like the ability to stretch like rubber and all this, right? But obviously that's in a perfect world now, right? I'm just saying, like, what I'm saying is I'm not saying that I would have wanted that to happen in place of rubber and the Nika Devil Fruit being revealed. Actually, that is what I'm saying. But what I'm saying, maybe I'm not articulating this properly, but I've always liked the fact that Luffy just had a rubber power. It should have just been a rubber power, and it was just like a nice, goofy-looking power, and he was just going to use this to become, the Pirate King. And now the fact that rubber, stretching like rubber, is an ability of a sun god is just very like I'm thinking about like sun gods like Surya in Hinduism, Apollo in Greek mythology. They didn't really have any like strange or body like abilities. They shone bright like the sun. Apollo could play the lyre. He was they were both radiant gods, but other than that, they didn't really like they could ride like a chariot maybe, but Amaterasu is also another sun goddess, right? But other than that, they didn't really have like the like too many strange abilities aside from shapeshifting. I think Amaterasu can shapeshift. I'm not saying that because of the Okami Capcom game. I think in Japanese myth she's actually shapeshifted before, but you can see like how shapeshifting as an ability is much more like if I were to put that as an ability for a person, you can see how someone can see that more as like a godlike or like a powerful like power or strength, or strong ability, as opposed to just stretching like rubber. And that's the thing, going from rubber to now a sun god is just doesn't feel organic because of that. Which also now brings me to the Nika devil fruit, or Nika as a person. The one thing that I'm hoping is that Nika is not the only god, and I'm hoping that there are multiple gods that existed during the Void Century. A moon god, or I don't know, like a water god. I don't know, right? Like all these different types of gods that existed during the Void Century. That's what I'm hoping for, because I think what Oda wants to do, I think, is create like a pantheon of these deities or these godlike figures during the during the Void Century. But see, that's another problem. I said godlike figure, not actual god. See, that's a big problem to me, because the idea now, if you just made this for a race where like if Nico wasn't actual, like if he was just like, so if his strength was what made him godlike and not things like immortality or the ability to like rule over people and grant their wishes, like kind of like a genie, if you will, right? Then that's going to be a big problem to me, because all the other distinct tribes and people and races in One Piece, they all have one trait. Like for example, like Blue Gilly from Dofi. He's part of the long leg tribe. What's his name? Apu is part of the long limb tribe, right? We have fishmen who can do fishman karate, and their trait is that they have fish-like bodies. You're just combining a fish, or an aquatic marine being, and a human being, and combining them together. A Lunarian, for example, is just controls fire and is invulnerable, basically. You know what I mean? So it's like all you have, like just these one note traits attached to all like these different races. Recognizable, easy to understand traits. And rubber, fire, and imagination are certainly easy enough traits to understand with Nika, but this also begs the question of like what Nika's race was. Like, did he belong? Like, what did he belong to? What is his what is his blood and his what is his genetics? What is his species? And if he has fire, rubber, fire, and imagination, then what is the moon god, or the lightning god, or the leopard god, or whatever it is? What powers do they have? Like the ability to just procure numbers out of thin air and produce paper and bring like meteors down, similar to Fujitora. Like who knows, And it just seems like it's a very weird and strange combination of powers. And even though One Piece in itself is zany and strange and weird and all about like imagination and and fictitious stuff, it just seems like the combination specifically here of rubber, fire, and imagination as powers and abilities just doesn't seem organic. And that's my kind of like my big deal. But as I said, I'm a little more open to it now that I've thought about gods in real life mythologies, and considered what they could do. So yeah. Another thing I mentioned briefly before was imagination being something distinct to Luffy, and or something like imagination being such a huge trait of the Nike Devil Fruit. And I don't really buy this. Or Oda hasn't really done anything to make me believe this. And the reason I say this is because it's not just Luffy or Nika that is representative of imagination. It's One Piece, the series as a whole. One Piece as a whole is bursting with imagination, whether it's its islands, its settings, its characters, its powers, what you can do with those powers, and something like katakuri, using donut holes, right? Making donut holes and punching into the donut hole, and then the punch coming out of, like, making donut holes and then punching into this donut hole, and then his fist coming out of another donut hole, is just as imaginative to me as anything Luffy has done. Anything Luffy has done, and it's kind of fitting because people were saying, or the comparison was made between Mochi and Rubber in One Piece in of itself, right? Something like Marco, what he just did in during the raid, where he took like one feather and then he made like some big fireball and then like he transported into it. I think it was like fighting like king or queen. I think it was during that chapter where he was fighting them both at the same time, right? Um, Him doing that is just as imaginative as anything Luffy has done in Gear 5. And Luffy's attacks themselves are pretty imaginative, like using rubber, and rubber being like an elastic stretchy material, and blowing air into it, and making it like big and powerful is something that is what's it called, that's imaginative. But the thing is that I was just thinking about that phrase during the chapter now, where Oda, he wrote saying that the power of specifically the Nika Devil Fruit user is only limited by imagination. I don't really buy that. I buy it, but that's not something that is specific to the Nika Devil Fruit user, the Nika Devil Fruit user. That's something that is true for anyone, for anybody, you know? Even something like what's his name? Yamato, her having that ice armor. Like, I've never heard of like a Wolf Mountain god having that ability. Having ice mountain skin, but somehow she has it. Like, that was just as imaginative to me as any other power that I've seen in One Piece. So I think that's something that if Oda wants to highlight, then he has to do like a really good job. And I just think it's going to be hard because everything else that he's shown before has already been imaginative. Like, I can't imagine like anything that Luffy has done. I mean, we saw him like produce glasses like basically out of his hair, right? But that's not really imaginative to me as so much as it is kind of like OP, if you will. So, um, um, what else do I want to talk about? There's two last things that I want to talk about too. One is just, I guess they're kind of the same thing, but really at this point, the only thing that is kind of attracting me to Gear 5 as a form is just the general Toonie A aesthetic. Basically, now that I think about it, the Toonie A aesthetic is all that's keeping it together for me. Because I'm gonna just, this is just my opinion, but to me, Gear 5 is Luffy's worst form, at least, or my least favorite form for Luffy. I prefer Gear 2, I prefer Gear 3, all the Gear 4 variants, and yeah, I prefer all of those to Gear 5. I like the red and color, or I like the red and black color scheme more than I do the white color scheme. I just like the general look with the tattoos, and even if Gear 5 is supposed to represent like Tom and Jerry and Cuphead and Looney Tunes and all these different sort of like slapstick comedy, like old animation, like effects, like tune effects, I still thought that something like Bound Man, as badass as it looked, still retained that Toonie A aesthetic. So to me, there's nothing that's really lost too much. I mean, of course, like in Gear 5, like the Toonie A aesthetic is dialed up like a notch above compared to like all the other forms that we've seen of Luffy. But really, that's about it. That's keeping it together for me. Because if it wasn't for that, I really wouldn't care about Gear 5, to be honest with you. Um, and that also brings up the question: does he even need to use his Gear 4 forms anymore? Part of Everyone knows me. I'm a huge Dragon Ball Yu Yu Hakusho fan, Fist of North Star fan. At some point, the Saiyan stopped using regular Super Saiyan, and I mean that's not entirely true. I mean they still use regular Super Saiyan, but I guess DBS might be a better example. Actually, no, Z is a good example where the Kaioken was a thing, and then there was no reason to use it anymore because Super Saiyan became a thing, right? If I go use DBS as an example, no one really uses Super Saiyan God too much because Super Saiyan Blue is a thing now. That's not entirely true because you saw it like in the Broly movie, but that aside, like you were like increasing in power and stuff, right? So I don't really think there's anything lost by Gear 4 forms not being used anymore. But here's the thing about that: One Piece is like that perfect fusion between straight power progression. It's one of the series that's it's kind of like that fusion between straight power progression series like Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Fist of North Star, and series like that require maybe like form switching and strategy, a little more tactical thinking, right? Something like Naruto, for example, right? Where you have to like think about the like something like Shikamaru versus Hidan, for example, where you have to like think about like where you're putting your explosive tags and all that sort of stuff, right? And One Piece and Hunter x Hunter, at least, they kind of seem to be like the fusion between these two types of series, where you take brute strength and you take tactics, and brute strength and tactics exist in Dragon Ball and Naruto and Fist of North Star and Yu Yu Hakusho. I'm not saying it doesn't, but One Piece seems to be, and Hunter x Hunter seem to be like the two series, and maybe even JoJo's, I would say, kind of seem to be like the series that, I guess maybe JoJo's is more like on the tactical side, if you will, but that combine these two pretty nicely together, because One Piece, it's made it pretty clear that if you have Conqueror's King Haki, that you're just above everyone else for the generally speaking, right? It's not so much devil fruits that separate someone; it's Haki, as Kaido was telling, and how he was saying, Roger and Whitebeard, how they had that, right? Um, but it's exactly because of that, which is why I think it would just be a shame to see the Gear 4 forms go away. Because, like I said, One Piece is a series that's a fusion of the two. I would have liked to see like Luffy using Gear 5 and then having to resort back to Gear 4 and then switching a little back and forth. And I think it's like Gear 5 is now Luffy's Super Saiyan, if you will, in a way. But it would be nice to see like Gear 4 still somehow being used in some capacity. Maybe that doesn't happen again, but to me that would be a shame because I prefer those forms to Gear 5. And I just think the red and black color scheme just looks better on Luffy than Gear 5 does. I can't really see a point for Bound Man anymore. I can only see him using Snake Man because of how fast it is. Like, obviously that's why he used it against Katakuri, because Snake Man was so fast that it was outrunning Katakuri's his advanced observation haki, his future vision ability, right? But I don't know if like that's likely either, because I don't know, for a non-awakened form, a non-zone awakened form to be faster than a zone awakened form, and like an awakened zone is just supposed to give like better physical capabilities to the user anyway. Just seems pretty contrived if that happens anyway. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation for me, right? Like Gear 4 forms are no longer used, damn. But if it is being used for like something, and I'm just saying this specific example, it just seems a little contrived. So it's just kind of a shame. And if that happens. And then I guess this kind of leads like into the last thing I want to say for this video, where my fear is that as much as I enjoy the Toonie A aesthetic, you guys know me. I love Nintendo. I love Kirby. I love Tom and Jerry. I love all those kind of like nice Toonie art styles, and I can appreciate Spyro, Crash, you name it, right? Knack even, for video games, you name it. I can appreciate that style of art very, very much, right? But there is a saying: too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And I think, and I don't want to go like, kind of steer this conversation in a different direction, but I feel like that's just true for things in general today, at least with things that I see on Twitter and fan art and, all this sort of the the types of product, or I don't want to say products, the types of stories and entertainment that is put out nowadays. I just think everything is too samey, and yeah, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So my fear is that Oda does too much of these, Tom and Jerry effect stuff with Gear 5. And it just kind of takes away from the seriousness of Luffy as a character. Because part of Luffy's charm was that he is a relatively carefree and absent-minded character, right? Relatively speaking. But when he turns badass, you can appreciate it, and Oda's able to draw him with, like, masculine-like features. One example now is, well, everyone loves when Luffy's hat is like his straw hat is covering his eyes, and you can just tell like he's about to go like beast mode, right? You can't really do that now with Gear 5 because he has the white hair, and I don't think Oda is gonna put the straw hat on Gear 5 Luffy and have it turn white, and have it hide his eyes and everything. It just would it because that the Luffy's hair is like such a distinct trait of his character. And even if he did do it, he would only make it a one time thing, I believe. I can't imagine Gear 5 Luffy fighting Sakazuki and Blackbeard wearing his hat on his head, hiding that hair. I just can't imagine, especially like with just what happened, with just what happened in this chapter with the glasses. I can't really see that happening, right? So my fear is that like too much of this Tom and Jerry effect takes away from the coolness, seriousness, and badassness of the series, because as much as people like to clown on One Piece's and Oda's art style and saying like these characters look goofy, he's made characters look badass, like Kaido, like Garp, like Katakuri, like Luffy, like Zoro. The list goes on, and part of that is just part of like that '80s sort of machismo sort of thing that Dragon Ball, Hakusho, like all these sort of older shonen do, you know. So that's a big fear of mine, because I don't really want to see like a huge amount of these Tom and Jerry effects when Luffy fights Sakazuki. Ace's death is such a big cloud that hangs over that fight that to just see like these popping out eyes like every 12 seconds is just gonna like dumb down the seriousness of that fight, for not just for me, for everyone, and that was a tweet that I saw on on Twitter today, and something that I responded to. I mean, it will be fun. Like, I'll enjoy the aesthetic, but at the same time, the double edge is that, the seriousness of that fight is going to be dumbed down. You and again, that's not to say that you can't have seriousness and goofy moments in your fights, right? But you have to be choice with them. You have to be particular, and you have to choose your moments with them. And that's what I'm saying here. My fear is that too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Everyone knows I'm a big DB fan. The final fight in the manga between Goku and Kid Buu was a fairly serious fight. But everyone remembers those two moments, right? Where Buu was dancing against Vegeta and everyone was laughing at that. And then when Goku and Buu were biting each other, that was pretty goofy, right? But that was those goofy moments were so like particular and choice, right? They were so small, and not so small. They were so few in occurrence that when it actually happened, it made it stand out. The seriousness of that fight was still there. Like the Genki Dama and Vegeta getting getting beat up and like all this stuff, right? You could still feel the tension of that fight, and it was momentarily, what's it called? Juxtaposed with moments of comedy and levity. I'm not even thinking about Mr. Satan as well in B, right? That was another part of that fight. So, but look at the Cell fight too. Cell versus Gohan was very serious. Cell versus Goku was very serious. But before that, you had the Mr. Satan stuff. It was very few in occurrence. And I'm just speaking specifically about the Sakazuki fight here, because I'm just trying to think like, because that is one fight like where Oda cannot fuck up when it comes to putting too much comedy and too much like Tom and Jerry effects in that fight. That is just one thing he cannot afford to do, because if he does that, that entire fight, that entire kind of like storyline would just be like so dumbed down in the end if that happens, right? I'm not saying it can't happen at all. I think you can make it work, but it has to be very choice and very particular. Very choice. He has to be on point with that. He has to be on point with that. And I'm saying that because, again, like look, I'm a big One Piece fan. I'm a big Oda fan, but I don't think he's perfect. I don't. I've had problems with the story before, right? This to me would be like a big problem for the story. Like that would be like a big like one of, if that happens like during that Sakazuki fight specifically. I mean, of course, it depends on the execution too, but if that happens, I would have to hold that against him. I would have to hold that against him. But yeah, that's basically a 30-minute video on how I feel about Nika 9 months after, and just everything in general. I think basically everything I wanted to say I've said in this video. I think I can't really, just off the top of my head, I don't think I left anything out. So, but yeah, that's it for this video. Tell me what you guys think, and Yeah, we'll converse in the comments. Thanks for watching.